You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in to WCAT Radio's Vows, Vocations, and Promises, Discerning the Call of Love. I am your host, Dr. Marianne Urlakis, and as part of our ongoing series spotlighting the authors who have contributed chapters to a comprehensive and new book entitled Spiritual Husbands, Spiritual Fathers, Priestly Formation for the 21st Century, edited by Bishop Philippe Estevez and Bishop Andrew Cousins, and published by Holy Apostles, College and Seminaries, and Route Books and Media, I have the privilege of once again speaking with Sister Marysia Weber. Before fully launching into today's program and detailing Sister Marysia's extensive background and expertise, I would like to invite Sister Marysia to open us with a prayer.
Oh, thank you very much, Mary, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Let's begin. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Merciful Father, we thank you for the opportunity to speak together this afternoon. Send your Holy Spirit upon us, that our discussion bear fruit for those working to form our future priests. We ask this through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Sister Marysia. Sister Marysia, as I've mentioned before, I am humbled when I look at your curriculum vitae. The list of your accomplishments and accolades is too long to summarize adequately, but I'm going to try. Briefly, Sister Marysia is a physician, board certified in psychiatry with a fellowship in consulting-liaison psychiatry. She completed her residency and training at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. She earned a master's degree in theology from Notre Dame. Sister has practiced psychiatry at her religious institute's multidisciplinary clinic, Sacred Heart Mercy Health Center in Alma, Michigan, from 1988 to 2014. In 2014, Sister Marysia accepted a very challenging and awesome role of the Director of the Office of Consecrated Life for the Archdiocese of St. Louis. She has been a facilitator for Project Rachel and is the chair of the Board of Directors for MyCatholic Doctor, an executive board member of the St. Louis Guild of the Catholic Medical Association, and an executive board member for the Institute of Theological Encounter with Science and Technology. Sister also serves as an Adjunct Clinical Instructor with the Department of Psychiatry at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. Additionally, Sister Marysia has published numerous articles in peer-reviewed journals. She's authored a number of books and chapters, including the chapter that we are going to be speaking about today in Spiritual Husbands and Spiritual Fathers, Chapter 15. Sister Marysia is highly sought after as a speaker and an expert. She is invited to speak before the Curia of the Vatican in 2002 regarding sexual abuse by the clergy in North America. Her expertise in seminary and religious formation is vast, and she is a formator with her own religious community. Welcome, Sister Marysia.
Well, thank you so much. You're very kind, Mary Ann. Delighted to be with you.
Sister, I'm honored to once again have you here today as my guest on Vows, Vocations, and Promises, Discerning the Call of Love. We shared an hour interview about a week ago when we discussed Chapter 9, and today we're turning our discussion to Chapter 15, entitled Guideposts for the Seminary Formator in Understanding and Assessing Levels of Preoccupation with the Use of Internet Pornography as a Formative Process for Moving from Vice to Virtue. And it's a fantastic chapter. Before we jump into the chapter itself, I'd like to hear again, but for the part of our audience who is just tuning in and hasn't heard before, could you briefly take us through your fascinating story of your own vocation? How did you end up here doing this?
Oh well, God's providence. Yes. I always wanted to be a physician. My family grew up in France. Actually, my father's side was from Russia. They immigrated from Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, and immigrated to Paris, France, where my father was born, and my mother was also from France. And so when we came to the United States, my parents always had difficulty with the English language, and children learn language pretty quickly. And so I would help my mother when we would take my younger sisters to the doctor, translating what was being said, medically. And so I thought, I really want to help people. And so I applied to medical school, and by God's kindness was accepted, and was doing rotations. Towards the end, I was headed towards the family practice, and in that state of really finishing up what I need to do to continue on in my what I thought to be work in family practice, I met a cardiologist, and I wanted to do a good cardiology rotation. So I approached him, and he was telling me, this is the last day I'm actually in Lansing here at Ingham County Medical Center, but you can come and practice and enjoy a rotation with me in cardiology in my hometown. And so I said, all right. And it turns out to be in Alma, Michigan. And so when I went to Alma, Michigan, to quite my surprise, his partner was a nun in full habit, which I hadn't seen before. And then he had a nurse who was a nun, and an administrator who was a nun. And I just found myself so intrigued by these sisters who really valued, of course, their religious vocation, and then wanting to be of service to persons in healthcare. And to my surprise, I then discovered just a vocation to religious life through being with them, through praying with them, and an answer to my hunger to deepen my intimacy with our Lord Jesus Christ and also be of service in a way that I never anticipated. And so I did enter the community, at which point in time my Mother General asked me if I would be willing to move away from family practice and tend toward psychiatry, which was a daunting request, in part. I thought, here I am, I'm not perfect. I've got things to work on. How am I going to help other people? And then she really wanted me to get some excellent training so that I can be of service to the church, and said, I really want you to train at the Mayo Clinic. And so I thought, oh, my goodness. So I did do a 6-week rotation there, just as, an elective. And again, to my surprise, no longer being so surprised by God's, plan, they offered me a residency. And so it really was the beginning of this unfolding of my vocation as a religious woman, and then also in healthcare, specifically psychiatry. And it was such a privilege to be able to walk into the sacred space of somebody's woundedness and see the grace of God, working and healing them. And so though I was intimidated at the beginning, found myself just feeling so privileged to be at the foot of the cross with so many persons that helped me also grow in their allowing me to accompany them. And so here now, many, many decades later, I'm humbled and grateful for the great gift of my vocation and the privilege that my education is an almsgiving to the church in being able to help those in need. Now in St. Louis, many religious and priests and seminarians, as well as, Catholics in the Archdiocese. So,
thank you for sharing that beautiful, beautiful story. I'm touched by every time I hear this story. We've talked about this 3 or 4 times now, your openness to the will of God. And so many of the folks that you are dealing with, you're asking them to look at the curves, the S-curves, the U-turns in their life and the plan that has been given to them, and to do difficult work. And you're coming from a space where you know that sometimes God asks an awful lot of you, and are willing to do that. I think that is so very, very beautiful that your own story shows just all of the twists and turns, that God has planned for us. More twists and turns than a corkscrew in many times, occasions. And yet you have been open to that and yet you ask that same openness of others as you accompany them on their journey too. And one of those journeys, a very difficult journey and a very difficult topic, is the topic of pornography. In your introduction to this chapter, you note that not everyone who has viewed internet pornography is going to go on to become a chronic user. However, the statistics regarding frequency and age at which pornography is being viewed and the number of people who go on to have a compulsion, an addiction, have difficulty with it is enormous. Can you help me define the scope of the problem for those who are tuning in?
Surely. When I finished my residency and then my additional fellowship at the Mayo Clinic in '89, the internet really wasn't even out for the general public. So I began to find that over the decades, even the first 10, 15 years when the internet, the World Wide Web became available to the general public in 1991, a shift in some of the persons that were coming, seeking therapy, and also going to the national meetings and having, this be brought up not as a concern, the use of internet pornography, and then finding more and more persons really presenting for therapy because they had experienced an increasing urge to view pornography to the point where then they became addicted to pornography. And we did not anticipate this at all. Typically when you think of an addiction, a professional description of an addiction usually has a couple of criteria. One is tolerance. So, for example, if I've never had any wine and I have one glass of wine, I'm going to feel tipsy. And if I have one glass of wine every day for about 2 weeks, I might begin to need 2 glasses of wine to have the same effect because I become tolerant to the amount of a substance that I'm using, and I need more of that same substance to feel the effect. Another criteria is withdrawal, where I'm maybe experiencing physiologic symptoms of an increase in blood pressure or pulse or in agitation, and that can cause irritability, even depression. And so you see how you have tolerance, you have withdrawal, and then you have some of the affective components. And those really were most talked about in using nicotine, street drugs, alcohol. But what we did not anticipate when the internet came out, something that affected our most sensitive sense, the eyes, to create an addiction, and now also very much the ears. And so this really began to change how we were looking at an addiction and looking at persons presenting, having difficulty not viewing pornography. And so this really opened up a whole area of study because there was a need. And so on the heels of it, persons who were neurophysiologists, who were psychiatrists, who were mental health care workers, who were addiction specialists, began to describe what has been observed of stages, interdependent as well as successive, that seem to be pretty common to an addiction, now to internet. In fact, it's probably one of the foremost addictions known in the world.
Wow. The ages that you mentioned there in that introduction too, at which children are viewing, and just the numbness that we have as a culture to the images that we're being bombarded with on the internet, on the TV, it's really disheartening and kind of frightening to take a look at just the thousands of images that are bombarding us daily and how our tolerance changes because of just the milieu that we're kind of swimming around in.
Yes, yes. When I was first doing this work, every single year I do a presentation on this, and now it's been about 20 years at least. I always look at statistics, and sex remains the number one search topic on the internet. And initially they were talking about the average, and this is well into it, the average age of exposure to internet pornography was 14, then it went down to 11, then down to 9. And those of us in the field know that 3, 4, 5-year-olds are being exposed because it's so available. It takes nothing for them to access, and persons around them are accessing. So it's really addressed a very young demographic. And we also know that it has a neurochemical...
Sorry to interrupt you. In some ways, it is that audience is being targeted. You mention the Pokemon and Action Man, and some of the names of domains and sites are 1 or 2 letters off from things that kids would be searching for school topics, and
absolutely
they end up getting drawn in.
Absolutely,
it's not accidental.
Oh, no, it's very deliberate. Pornographers sometimes name a site so that a child would then click onto it, and to their shock, unfortunately, it opens up to an internet pornography site, and then they click on it again, and it opens up to another pornography site. And, that's actually called mouse trapping, where they deliberately expose children unwittingly to pornography that a child never really intended to access. So I encourage parents to please tell their children that if they see something on the internet that is surprising to them or frightening to them, to tell them they're not bad, that they didn't do anything wrong, that to talk with them, that they can help them maneuver through it, so that they also become, less afraid. Because oftentimes, sexual things can bring us shame and guilt, and they're not sure how to handle this. So it's very important to mentor our children of what are some of the potential dangers with the internet that are far more available today than ever were before.
And at the other end of the spectrum, then, you're dealing with, as you're talking about then information and guidelines, you're talking about young men who may have been the 3, 4, 11-year-olds that unwittingly stumbled onto these sites and carry shame and guilt because they haven't known who to go to, and the problems that can lead to. Before we get into that area, you mentioned neurotransmitters and the science. I'd like to build a little foundation there. Can you go back and talk about the science behind this? Just what happens as we move from visualizing something to compulsion to potential to addiction?
Surely. When we think of addiction disorders, there are generally, 5 stages, and they have different names, but I've kind of given them a generic name that really describes what it is. So let's just first kind of look at, the first is experimentation. So once a person stumbles onto a pornographic website, they open the door for further exploration, and by the anonymity of electronic transactions, then the person who's accessed kind of secretly experiments without getting caught. Then this can lead to intermittent use, with a growing curiosity to view pornographic images, and then kind of third is what is called the habituation or the habit. And that's when there's repeated exposure, almost similar to building a tolerance to alcohol that I said before. The persons begin to develop a habit of sexual fantasies and accessing pornographic material. But at this point in time, this is where there's a transition point that we don't see with alcohol or crack cocaine, for example, quite in the same way. Because once you get to the habit, there is a next stage where it's called a compulsion. But the reason somebody gets compulsively desiring to look at an image is because they need more sexualized images to have the same arousal. And that's what we call actually becoming sensitized, where they actually become desensitized to an image and they need something more sexually titillating or exciting. And so pornographers then mix sex with violence And so what do you think of when you think of violence? You think of sex. When you think of sex, you think of violence. And so now it's throwing in more neurochemicals, not just the pleasure chemicals of dopamine and acetylcholine and oxytocin and all of those that are born in, but the adrenaline gets a kind of a mix that then heightens just the arousal that occurs in the pleasure center of the brain that really then begins to lead to a deformation of what that pleasure center is intended to regulate healthy pleasures.
Wow. So the brain then is being bombarded by this different neurochemicals, and it does become a true addiction because in essence it is a chemical addiction to one's own chemicals.
And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think that what I wanted to say is that, in part there are several reasons for the addictive nature that have evolved from Internet pornography. If we reflect on the past 40 years, that in the 1960s there was the introduction of the birth control pill, and so at that point in time, then there's a way in when American society was introduced at large to separate sexual intimacy from its core purpose of unity and procreation to making it, quote, recreational and limiting the possibility of conception. So you have that. And so then, sexual activity with not the procreative part of it in an intimate relationship with a spouse. Then when you have the advent of the Internet, then you have three features that are often referred to as the triple A engine, where there's accessibility, there is affordability, and there's anonymity. So today, every household, most kids, every workplace has accessible to them some electronic device that has access to the Internet, where, in fact, employers today, there are statistics that show that about 20% of men and 17% of women admit to accessing Internet pornography while at work, and that it's the second most frequent diversion of the misuse of the Internet in the workplace after accessing personal email. So that's the accessibility. It's very accessible. Second, it's affordable. It's free. 90% of persons who use online pornography pay, quote, nothing, and maybe 10% pay an average of $60 per month. So even young children don't need to have money in order to do this. You don't have to have a job to do this. And then third, there's the anonymity, and that contributes to the false belief that there are no untoward or bad repercussions that will occur from accessing Internet pornography sites. And as a religious woman, when you think of also one's spiritual life, it's not surprising that this triple A engine presents challenges to our spiritual life. Wouldn't you say that accessibility counters chastity of the eyes and celibate chastity? Let's just see anything. Affordability counters poverty of time and possibly money, but it just can take up so much time. And anonymity, which counters the accountability of oneself, one's actions, and obedience. So those are some of the psychosocial elements. When I'm going a little bit deeper now to your question on the neurological implications, this was kind of a fascinating situation where the brain has what is called neuroplasticity. We know now that the brain actually doesn't fully develop until age 25 and continues to develop and actually can modify itself and adapt to changes that are necessary. So like, for example, if you remember first learning how to ride your bike, you would teeter back and forth on the bike, you'd fall off, you get back on. Well, the nerves send out messages to the teetering back and forth. But then as you get better at riding your bike and you get more efficient and you get more effective, what happens over time is those nerve messages that go out to teetering get pruned back because they're not necessary anymore. So this is a very normal lifetime phenomenon for the brain's capacity to stimulate the nervous system to be most efficient and effective where it is most frequently accessed. So that's key. What fires together wires together and becomes a more definitive pathway in your brain. So I think that this is really an important factor to look at the brain physiology. But then with regards to internet pornography, we've learned that it's not just what you view or the content of the message, because recall, pornography has been available for ages. Usually in days past it used to be the magazines that you only get once a month, and it's only one picture and it's static.
The walls in Pompeii.
Yes. But few persons got addicted to those magazines.
Right.
So what is it about internet pornography that has made it so addictive? So it's not just, the content of the message. This is Marshall McLuhan was really the first one to describe this with a brilliance. He was the pioneer that looked at the effects of television on the brain, and he said it's much more the medium of the message than TV that played a more significant role in altering or stimulating the brain than the content of the message or the images actually seen. So now, let's fast forward to now where we have high-speed internet. So when you think of the speed at which these pornographic images are bombarding your visual centers and your auditory centers, then if you think that the more you use a pathway, the stronger it becomes, the more it wires together.
Sure.
That's what has happened with internet pornography beyond just pornography. So that's one reason that it's affected the brain, because of the rate and speed. And then also because that stimulation of those images also then stimulates the pleasure center with the neurochemicals. So with regards to something that's pleasurable, it's a whole system, and I'm being very simple here in my description. But when we experience some pleasure, some food we're enjoying, the company of a friend, whatever it would be, there's little spritz of dopamine that's released. So sexual pleasure also is pleasurable, and so you can get some release of dopamine that's discharged from the brain. But then we also get other neurochemicals released. So, for example, acetylcholine is discharged, and it's important in the role of learning and memory, which has to do in the amygdala part of the brain and hippocampus part of the brain. And then that's stored a little bit. And so then when there's been the pleasure from the arousal and the climax, then you get the release of oxytocin and serotonin. You might get a little endorphins for the little euphoric high. So all of that gets stimulated, but the brain has normally a feature of moderation. Everything in moderation is healthy. And we have what is called our prefrontal cortex, which sits on top of our eyes. And it is intended to tell the pleasure center that it needs to pause, that this is enough that's being stimulated, that too much is not good, like too much food is not good, or too little food is not good. So too much drink is not good. So that regulatory process that is inherent to our executive functioning of our prefrontal lobe, if it's not accessed, becomes this fragile little pathway. And again, what is traveled the best and the most is the strongest. But if you're just using these visual images and auditory images, that's where the overload goes. And that hyperarousal then creates an overstimulation, but then the pleasure center says, this is too much. It's like an oversaturated sponge that can't take any more. And then that pleasure center then gets triggered to a withdrawal and a craving. So at this point in time, those who suffer with an addiction to internet pornography are looking at it not for pleasure, but really to release some of the agitation and the irritation that they're experiencing, much like an alcoholic might drink, because they don't like the anxiety they're experiencing from, the withdrawal symptoms. So all of this is going on with internet pornography with an intensity that is beyond what alcohol has done, even what crack cocaine has done. Because mind you, you don't need more different chemicals to get a high from crack cocaine. Is generally they use more until they get really in big trouble. But with internet pornography, you're seeking more risque images, more mixes, so you get this, this erototoxic kind of chemical cocktail that really ends up really harming the functioning of the pleasure center.
And we won't even touch on the spiritual aspect of what's happening there, too. But all in all, it's an enormously complex picture. And if all of that is happening in an individual, especially a young individual's brain, how were they able to concentrate on the other tasks at hand and live life fully?
Well, we now know that there is the most common cause of an attention deficit disorder is from the hyperstimulation of the brain. Now we see that with excess online gaming, excess, screen use in general, but with internet pornography, it makes it, if you imagine that short space where those stimulation occur mainly in the pleasure center or the reward center, and not those longer pathways, the pause, the ponder, to reflect, to be able to make a decision about an action.
Yes.
Then it creates a difficulty attending and then concentrating, which has other ramifications psychosocially, neurochemically, interpersonally, spiritually.
Wow. You mention in the book that the addictive quality and deleterious effects of the internet pornography require a dedicated plan to temper and convert the urges, and that merely suppressing the sexual appetite is insufficient. What is a Catholic approach to treating internet pornography, compulsion, and addiction?
Great question. I love St. John Paul, and he spoke of the fact that we need to convert our appetites, not to treat persons as objects, to live by reason and not by urges. And he, clearly states that converting our appetites requires a habitual moderation of the very desires that lead to sexual behavior, and that really is the goal of chastity. So it's the values of chastity that need to be internalized, where you have a regard for the person, for the dignity of who they are. Now, somebody who's addicted to internet pornography, this can feel overwhelming. However, persons do change. They can refashion the neurochemical, the neurotransmitters, the neural pathways in their brain to return to a healthy level of functioning. And even if this takes a couple of years, maybe doing it 3 or 4 times a day, maybe taking 5 minutes a day, it really would be worth it, I think. And so I think this is something to really look at as Catholics. And Pope Emeritus, Benedict, says that the world has made love a feeling. Love is not a noun. It's not a thing. Love is a verb. It's to love. It's an action we engage in. It's a sacrifice we make, giving ourselves to another. And Benedict states that love, though tarnished, really needs to be taken up again, brought back to its original splendor so that it can illumine our life and bring it back to the right path. so I think we have we have the beauty of the sacraments. We have reconciliation. We have Eucharist. We have sacred scripture. We have, so much available in our spiritual lives to really grow. And I think the key to overcoming an addiction to internet pornography really is the mindset of achieving the virtue of chastity. And in so doing, working towards literally being able to convert and remap the brain that allow us to really return to the beauty of who we are, who we're called in God's image and likeness. And when I've worked with individuals and looked at those who have been able to become free of this addiction, and I'm here to tell you this is treatable. This is treatable. I have worked with many individuals. This is treatable, and so have many others in this field. So please take courage. That, I think, is such an important message for persons to hear.
But the greatest lesson, people need to hear that hope. They do need to hear that hope. They do. I've talked to folks about this particular issue, and the feeling of being overwhelmed, they need to hear that there is hope, that it is treatable with an expert like yourself.
Yes, and I think also to look at how they can work towards purifying their memory and imagination. And so, what gives you the hope that you're describing? One, we need to have motivation. So, we've learned the greatest lesson is that it requires motivation. And if there's not motivation, then somebody needs to find a reason to be motivated to become free of their internet pornography addiction, and then find additional reasons to stay motivated. And then just like you're saying, hope. Hope is a key ingredient because hope creates that mindset that a problem can be solved. And it's so crucial to learn from mistakes and to keep striving, to overcome this addiction. So, I think those are very, very important. This is where our faith, having faith that accessing the sacraments and speaking with persons, a counselor, a spiritual director, a priest that can help guide us, a sponsor that, AA has been helpful for many individuals as well, to really believe that you're not alone in this, that you can be accompanied. And I think that's also very, very important.
You give some excellent and practical steps for changing a habit, the cue, routine, reward. Could you elaborate?
Yes, absolutely. When what I've learned in my own experience as well as with persons that I've worked with is that what drives a habit, especially one that's challenging to change, is not always obvious. And in order to change a habit, we have to become much more aware of what it is that triggers it and the routine that we fall into in order to look at what we want to modify. Because often we engage in some inaccurate thoughts, actions that don't even bring us to the, quote, reward that we're seeking. And so I like to use the example of, let's say, if I'm really nervous about writing a paper or, going to take an exam, and so I'm in my room, and so the trigger or the cue is my anxiety about this, and so then my routine is to go to the cupboard and get a couple of cookies, and then because I get hungry, and then I go back. But if I assess my routine, was the reward eating more cookies, addressing the trigger of the anxiety that I have about writing this paper or studying for this test? No. And so once I'm becoming more aware that the routine I've engaged in does not really bring me the reward I want, it allows me to pause, to ponder, to engage my prefrontal cortex, the executive function that I have that God gave no other creature He created, to maybe develop a routine that will get me more the reward I want. And, changing a routine requires willpower. It motivates why I do what I do, and it helps me develop an ability to delay short-term gratification in order to reach more long-term goals. And I love, St. Thomas Aquinas always bringing in spiritual aspects of it, where he says that just as a man can increase the strength of a habit by acting in accordance with it, so conversely, he can lessen its strength and eventually lose it, either by acting contrary to it or by ceasing to use it. And that's simple, but when you think of decades ago, centuries ago, he was saying that so clearly. And there are many persons now doing studies on habit, and it's pretty well accepted from those doing this work in the field that the stronger the link between the cue and the trigger, or the trigger and the routine, the stronger the habit. And, for example, if you're thinking of, okay, most of us have a cell phone in a purse in a pocket or something. So if the cue is that the cell phone buzzes in your pocket, let's say, and, what's the routine? Typically the routine, well, who's contacting me? You pull out your phone to see, And the reward is this transitory moment of, a distraction that somebody's trying to reach me, or even it's an automated email or a tweet or whatever it is. But is that what I'm going to continue to want to do, is just kind of mindlessly picking up my phone to interrupt a conversation I'm having with someone or whatever it might be? So the key to changing a habit is to identify the stimulus that might be difficult to resist, that's been triggered by a cue, but to build a plan beforehand for how to work it through. And so you kind of
beforehand, and that is so important.
Beforehand.
Your chapter, yeah.
Yes, the beforehand. So what is it that I'm going to do when the trigger is, for example, to view internet pornography? And I know my trigger is when I feel anxious or I feel insecure and I don't feel like things are going well. So let's say I'm a seminarian in a parish and I've been really working on this issue, and then I hear that, one of the children has been cyberbullied or something. And so my trigger in the past would be to go, oh my gosh, I got to relieve this tension by accessing internet pornography, but I know that doesn't bring me the reward I want at all. This is just horrible. So instead, I'm going to do a pause, a ponder, and instead I'm going to look at what it is that is bothering. So it's, how do I address this cyberbullying? And so instead, I'm going to talk to the parish priest. I'm going to talk to the principal. We're going to look at how we maybe can look at cyberbullying and develop a plan. And all of a sudden, my sexual arousal thoughts are just gone because I'm focusing on the here and now, the duty of the moment, the grace of the moment. And that can make such a difference in where I put my focus, because we cannot intensely focus on two things at once. And so if I begin to shift what I am attending to what is present before me, this helps then dissipate the intensity of the urges that I was focusing on prior to. And I have individuals do a lot of these different exercises that can be of service to them. So like the beforehand. So I like to think in terms of what are called SMART goal routines.
And SMART, has that. Yes,
yeah.
I love that acronym. That's fabulous. Could you elaborate?
Yes, a SMART goal routine. There's various versions of it, but one descriptive acronym is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, or trackable. So if you want to, purify your memory and imagination and want to grow in an area of your spiritual life, growth and holiness, so what might be a SMART goal routine that you can plan beforehand when you're trying to purify your memory and imagination? So individuals that I've worked with, sometimes like before going to bed, they pray a prayer to St. Michael and then to Our Lady for purity. They can get out of bed and hold a crucifix with both hands and then let the truth that our Lord loves them so immensely, really, really let that in. And really focus on that. And then hold both hands with a rosary and, allow them to know Our Lady beside them and pray for different individuals that they love, pray for the intentions they have. They might post scripture passages by the computers. So what they're doing is they are sanctifying their environment with a plan beforehand.
Wow.
And then with regards to their emotional life, what can they plan beforehand? They know that it's usually nighttime that's a problem. Well, maybe they can decide to turn off the computer by 5 p.m., maybe even discontinue their internet cell phone, participate in maybe a support group. But what they're doing is they're really looking ahead of time to establish kind of a healthy daily routine based on intervening in cues or triggers. That's why it's important for them to outline the routine of what triggers them accessing the pornography, because then they can set up something in the here and now that's very reasonable, that fits in their day-to-day life, that they can focus on. And then I also like to have them do what is called a sensory exercise, because again, we can't focus on two things intensely at once. So what are 5 things that I see? And you've got to take at least 2 seconds. 5 things that I see. The picture in my office with a halo around Our Lady, or the clock in the room, or, the rug on the floor. 5 things that I feel, my foot in my shoe, the cincture around my waist, and, 5 things that I hear, the hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of a clock, a car going by, and if there's a smell, if I might be in the refectory, I might be, in chapel and there's the incense. But what you're doing is, by this pause and ponder, you're really introducing a purification of the imagination and a purification of the memory, and it'll help dissipate some of these experiences. And these I have persons do in their daily routines. For example, when they're brushing their teeth, or when they're going for a walk. So you're beginning to build a pathway of that sensory exercise, the 5 things that I see, 5 things that I hear, 5 things that I feel, and if there's a smell. I like to do this. One time when I was at our clinic in Alma, Michigan, I had a little dog. Her name was Lady, and she was abused. Most of our dogs came from a pound. And then we have another lab dog, a golden lab. He was at the convent. Nobody was home to let him out. So I thought I would do a good deed. I just finished with my patient on time. I ran home during the noon hour. I put Lady in the pen, and I took the Carlo, the other dog, out. And then I got Lady out of the pen. I was going to fix myself a sandwich, and I saw that Lady had rolled in duck poop. So I said, oh, no.
I have 3 labs. I get it.
Here. I have no choice here. And so then here I'm doing this good deed, and so I'm getting angry with her, and I'm looking at the clock. It's 1:45. I have a patient at 1. And so I said, I'm just eating a sandwich, and I can't find her. She's gone in the living room. She's beginning to rub on the couch. I'm thinking, oh, no. So I thought, all right, I have no choice. I've got to wash this dog. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do the sensory exercise, because I'm losing all merit here for any good deed that I tried to do by volunteer to come and take the dog out, because nobody else was here for Carlo. So I said, all right, I get a towel, I get some shampoo, and I go down to the utility sink in the basement. 5 things that I see: the duck poop on her back, the clock ticking, the shampoo. Then I kind of squirt it in my hand. I hear the shampoo in my hand squirting out. I hear an ambulance going by. I hear the pitter-patter of her nails. Then, I go through what I feel, the water through my hands with the shampoo over the duck poop and her fur, the fur becoming more clean. And in smell, I chose jasmine shampoo. And so it smells really good. And then I take her out of the utility sink, and she's just kind of shaking herself off with water. And I thought, she was just being a dog. But my doing that sensory exercise helped kind of calm and having me focus on the here and now, the duty of the moment, the grace of the moment. And it changed all that internal turmoil that I was having. And it was just really a gift of God. And so I think this is something we can do in so many ways.
That exercise is absolute gold. I've done it before, too. I don't like to fly, and I really don't like international flights. Several years ago, I was invited to sing for the Holy Father as part of a choir with my family. If I didn't go, they weren't going to go, and I wasn't going to tell them they couldn't do the experience because Mom didn't want to fly. And so that sensory exercise got me across the ocean and back, and 2 years later did it again.
Wow.
That exercise was absolutely gold. I'm so glad someone suggested it, and it also got me through singing or being in situations, public situations, where ordinarily it would have taken me 15 minutes to get the sting off before I was comfortable. That exercise is wonderful. So I can see how it would apply here with this particular issue of rewiring the brain. And I think that is so beautiful. When we think of ourselves as a composite of body and soul, as we are healing the soul, we can also heal the body. The body, the neurotransmitters, our brain can actually be rewired, repathed, as our soul is being healed by God too. It's beautiful.
Absolutely. And what I love about so many of these exercises that really fit into living a life of the little virtues, nothing heroic. And they can be applied if I'm suffering with internet pornography addiction, but when I apply them to other areas of my life, for healthy moderation, for appropriate hours of sleep and good nutrition and prayer life and company of friends and sufficient exercise, all of those begin to participate in having me be the best that I can be, the healthiest, the happiest that I can be. So that's the beautiful thing. You don't have to just hold off and go see a therapist to, secretly address this. And for some individuals, some professional help is very important. But what I am talking about here are really resources that are so part and parcel to our tradition of our Catholic faith, of our sacramental life, that are really the beauty of the dignity of the human person and how we can relate to one another. And by accessing those very simple human qualities, it really helps in so many ways to help us move from little vices, sometimes bigger vices, to really little virtues and bigger virtues, where we can really come to know ourselves, love and be loved, and to know and be known on deeper, deeper levels, which is why God created us.
Beautifully said. Sister, toward the end of this chapter, you talk about, for the formator, assessing the level of preoccupation and some closing recommendations for the formator. Could you focus on that section?
Yes, I think that, I think the formator needs to have a deeper understanding of men's affective level of maturity and where he has room to grow. And basically what I'm saying is, can growth and maturity be evaluated in the external forum? And, I propose that this is a yes, and I want to also make it very clear. I'm not suggesting to question the validity of the distinctions between the external and internal form, nor to violate that, because I have a high regard for it. But if we go to the church document specifically on priestly formation, like the program for priestly formation, number 93, asks of the formators, some really very important and significant things. For example, it states, certain habits or skills are necessary instruments on the path to effective and healthy celibate chastity, and these are to be encouraged in seminary programs. Among these habits and skills are appropriate self-disclosure, a cultivated capacity for self-reflection, an ability to enter into peaceful solitude, ascetical practices that foster vigilance and self-mastery over one's impulses and drives, a habit of modesty. An especially important practice is holding all persons in the mystery of God, whether they are encountered in the course of formal ministry or ordinary life. And it also, in another paragraph, says the candidate should give evidence of having interiorized this formation, suggesting that healthy celibate chastity is not only an internal motivation and commitment, but also shows itself in external observable behaviors as well. And that's something that I addressed in much greater detail in our prior interview on my chapter, Markers of Human Maturation and Seminary Formation, Becoming a Gift for Others. So I think that it is important to try to get a sense as to where a man is, again, in our so hyper-sexualized cultures. I really feel that so many individuals today really are the victims of this. They didn't ask to be exposed at such young ages, and it comes literally, just talk about being in your face. But how is it that we look at an individual who's been maybe exposed, probably exposed, and maybe addicted or not addicted? And again, since we're not really sure if, a chronic daily user or periodic user means it's a worse situation or not, because we're also individual, that there are assessment tools that help determine a level of involvement in pornography that will help give some specific guidance on how maybe to help an individual. And there's a lot of these tools that are available, and they can be accessed online. They're in various publications that can help counselors, bishops, clergy, family members to help an individual who is suffering with this. But screening instruments are never diagnostic by themselves. And also, you would need a professional to really look at these together. But there are some key features that you can look to that I have outlined in this chapter that really follow some of the stages of addiction that I spoke to earlier on, where maybe they're at the experimental stage, and describe what you might actually view in someone who's just at the experimental stage. And then maybe who's someone at the maybe intermittent stage, but it doesn't dominate their thoughts, for example. Pornography doesn't. And maybe the fantasies are minimal. But there might be growing curiosity, but they're desiring and they're talking with a spiritual director, and also appropriately with their formator, with regards to his self-awareness regarding celibate chastity. Is he moving towards self-knowledge and self-direction regarding this priestly identity? So there's a desire to kind of look at this, to grow in it, maturation in it, purify, some transparency appropriate depending on the fora, and how is he handling some successes, some failures, and his strivings to do so. So that might be kind of intermittent. And then if it's moving up to the next stage of habitual, maybe a little harder to kind of plot out the thoughts and desires, and so are there episodes of binging? Are there maybe some early withdrawal symptoms? Is somebody maybe going to benefit some professional help here? And this is where the formation team really needs to prayerfully look together to, see is this someone that can get help within the context of formation, or do they need maybe something a little bit more intensive during the summers? This would really be done on a one-by-one, If you're finding, though, that they're really at a compulsive stage, some more discernment needs to be looked at. Is it, a difficulty that's maybe hindering their prayer life or their other study situation? Again, there's no one black and white way to look at this, but to try to identify, are they maybe at this stage, or are they at the addictive stage where that might be a bit harder, and maybe that needs to be a more focused area of healing and renewing before they are able to go on in formation. And would it be more appropriate for them to step out of seminary to get this really area of woundedness addressed, because it will really be difficult for them, in that vocation, actually in all vocations, in marriages as well. Sure. So I think that, it's really the role of the external formator and the spiritual director to facilitate an interiorizing and a strengthening of this seminarian's capacity of freely embracing priestly celibate chastity. At the same time, the seminarian has a right to privacy, and so there needs to be an appropriate establishment of protocols within the seminary, consent forms, designated places where the information is reserved for specific persons, for a specific person, the period of time that the records are retained, and if the records then need to be then expunged or destroyed because somebody's moved beyond that. So there's just so many things to look at that I think seminaries are beginning to really address in a way beyond, frankly, any other public institution. And so we have a long way to go, but I think the church is really working to address this in as comprehensive a way as we know how so far to really help individuals, again, to look at an addiction that we didn't expect, that kind of caught us off guard, that now we know what it can do, and we also have some tools to help individuals become free of this. And so, again, I encourage anybody who's suffering, this is treatable. You can get help. Do not despair. Seek out the appropriate individuals who can be of service to you.
That leads me into my final question here. If you were speaking directly, as we are Holy Apostles College and Seminary, the program Vows, Vocations, and Promises, Discerning the Call of Love, and WCAT Radio is a portion of Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and we do have a fair number of men in formation, seminarians themselves, who are listening to the broadcast. If you were speaking directly to the men in formation, the seminarians, and you had one nugget to leave with them, particularly some who may be struggling with this particular issue, is there one single nugget you could leave with them?
Okay. I would highly recommend them, if they can get a hold of this chapter, because there's a lot more of real practical things, and the suggested resources and steps that are outlined. But they need to be reviewed. They need to be repeated several times, really, before a temptation begins to subside. Because remember, change is a process. It's not an event. But when we repeatedly exercise our spiritual and our affective muscles, we grow stronger in using our free will, making it easier to resist the next temptations that we might face. So I would say, don't give up if you have a setback. If you fall, get up and keep striving.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Sister, it has been a joy to spend this hour with you, and we are really running out of time. It has been just a treat to have both of these programs to be able to speak with Sister Marysia regarding her expertise in seminary formation, and this week regarding Chapter 15 of Spiritual Husbands, Spiritual Fathers, Priestly Formation in the 21st Century. Sister, would you be so kind as to close us with a prayer?
Yes, would be glad to. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Holy Mary, Mother of Mercy, intercede for us to your Son, that those suffering from the vice of internet pornography may find healing and freedom to experience their true dignity, made in God's image and likeness. And we ask this through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Sister, thank you for being my guest, and listeners, thank you once again for tuning in to WCAT Radio's Vows, Vocations, and Promises, Discerning the Call of Love.
My pleasure. Thank you, Marianne.
Hi there. This is Christine Mooney Flynn, host of the Catholic Mama podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join me over on the Catholic Mama. To develop a Christian family and raise children who are, and who, God willing, will continue to be confident Catholics, requires us as parents to be confident in our faith as well. So each week, I dive into topics that help to make sense of the Catholic faith and how to live out that faith in our vocation as husbands and wives, moms and dads. So whether you need help in explaining aspects of Catholic doctrine like the real presence in the Eucharist, or if you're looking for practical ideas on how to live a more Catholic life, my goal is that you'll find the answers and guidance you're looking for over on my show, The Catholic Mama. I hope to see you there.
To a production of WCAT Radio, please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up where knowledge takes flight.